Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello and welcome to the Business Line's State of the Economy podcast. In this episode, we will explore the most common mistakes that startups generally make quite early in their journey. Be it poor cash flow management or inefficient marketing strategy, these mistakes can cause serious damages to startups. They can hinder growth and development of startups. We have with us today Ms. Mansi Jain, who is the Chief Executive Officer of DigitalPaani. Her startup is trying to solve water and sanitation problems. The startup is building life cycle management systems for wastewater treatment plants to protect natural resources from contamination. She is interested in developing scalable solutions that tackle problems at the intersection of environment and development. We also have with us today Mr. Shyam Menon, who is the co-founder of Bharat Innovation Fund and Infuse Ventures. Bharat Innovation Fund invests in IP-driven startups in sectors like healthcare, agri-tech, fintech, mobility, and logistics. Mr. Menon has also co-founded Infuse Ventures, India's first clean tech-focused early-stage venture capital fund, which is supported by global organizations like BP and IFC. Welcome to the podcast, Mansi and Shyam.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kurmanath.
Thank you, Mr. Kurmanath.
Shyam, you and your fund must have vetted tens or even hundreds of startups so far before making funding decisions. Can you tell us what are some red flags or warning signals that you generally look for in startups? Some serious flaws or serious mistakes that they might be making?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Kurmanath. I mean, from our experience, what we've seen is, if the founders are not clearly understanding what is that problem that they are tackling and, only have relatively a superficial understanding of the problem, then inevitably it's not going to go anywhere. So ideally, and our focus has primarily been on B2B deep tech on the Bharat Innovation side. Infuse was a early stage climate seed fund we ran from 2012. That's fully invested now. So we are not investing out of Infuse anymore. But from our experience in Bharat Innovation, which is more deep tech focused, which is actively investing, we've got over 16 startups out invested from that fund so far. But experiences are similar across both funds. Is if the founders don't have a really deep understanding of what that issue is, and when we speak to them, we should learn something that was not obvious to us before about that sector in terms of some insights. If we don't get that, we've seen over the years that it's unlikely that they will succeed. Unless that problem statement is that compelling that you want to put the next 10 odd years, 10 years plus 10 to 15 years of your life doing that, you're not going to succeed either. You have to either find a problem that is that meaningful to you and you want to solve it for that long, because the journey of the startup is that long. And the other thing is, then there are multiple places, early signals, why things may not work out. One is people tend to forget that what that original core mission is very early for whatever reason. There could be multiple reasons that the founders get sidetracked and get caught up in the minutiae, forgetting what that core mission was with which they started this business. And the moment you lose track of the core mission, that's the end of the game. Because there is so much stuff that's going to be happening around you. You just get caught up in the small stuff that's not going to, if you forget what the core mission was, you'll just get caught up doing work, but will not lead to a final outcome. Then the other few things we've seen is we need to see founders who have the ability to attract extremely high quality people to join them, even if they can't afford to pay them much. That's where the ability for the leader to rally the troops in some ways, even if they may be much younger than the folk that they're trying to hire. But you need to see that capability of the founder to be able to attract senior high quality people to come along, even at a 50, 60, 80% reduction in salary, because they believe in the mission with which these guys are starting out. If that is there, if you can show signs of that, that's also a good indicator of success. If you can't do that, then that's another issue. Another few things that, at least from our point of view, we've seen is, okay, the startup identifies a problem, it's meaningful, and they're willing to put in the work, and you start developing something. Your early customers really need to champion it. I mean, if the early customers for whom you developed it, these are basically the guys who have the major pain point. If they are not going to use it, or they are not comfortable or happy with the solution, or are unhappy basically with the solution, then the odds of this thing succeeding again is very low, because your best evangelists are your early customers. So if that doesn't happen, then you're again stuck, because if your early customers are not supporting you, then going forward, getting to mass adoption becomes much harder. On the same vein, the problems that we've seen is this push to make a perfect solution. This whole notion of keeping on working on the solution until it perfects before you put it out. That also many a time doesn't lead to the right outcome, because you don't really know what the customer needs until you iterate with them. So you start with something that's viable, a minimum viable product, and then you iterate with the customers, at least with some of the forgiving early customers. If you can do that, then the product itself will evolve in a way that is more useful for both parties. Many a time what happens with trying to perfect a product very early is that you end up developing a whole bunch of stuff that the customer may not be willing to pay for, or may not even find value. You thought they need, but they may not need it to begin with. So these are all things we've seen. I mean, there are many more, but these are just some early thoughts that I had. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Shyam. Mansi, congratulations on your successful recent round. In the times of funding winter, you are able to raise some good money. What is your experience as a co-founder, knowingly or unknowingly? Has your startup ever committed any mistake, and know how actually you have corrected it and come out of it, or even preempted it?
Yeah, definitely. I think, making mistakes is part of a startup life cycle, because the nature of the beast is that you're learning a lot of things as you go. And some things you'll get right, some things you won't. Of course, it's all about how you bounce back from it or treat it going forward and prevent the same mistake from reoccurring. So I was resonating a lot with what Sham said. I think there were a lot of great insights in there. If I look back on our journey, I would say couple of things which stand out to me. I think one is waiting for too much perfection in the results before going out there. That's something, and a lot of it also comes from the founders' personalities and sort of where their personal flaws come from. So this is one thing I've noticed. We've done time and again. We did take time to fundraise because we wanted more to show before we went out in the market. I think there have been some customers where the problem statement in itself was very hard, and there was a lot of support that we needed from them in order to achieve success. But we were trying to show them great results before asking them for anything. Whereas in actuality, to get good results, you need their collaboration as well. It is a collaborative effort to get the right outcome, which you both are desiring. So I think making that more clear and asking for that before necessarily being able to show the best of results is something that we have not done always in some tough cases that we encountered. And I think that's an area we could have improved on. I think also we've invested a lot on org building and servicing, especially in the last 1 year, and possibly building more sales strength and presence in the market a little bit earlier on could have led to higher growth in this last 1 year. Now, of course, we're doing those things. We're now beginning to put out our presence a lot more in terms of marketing, branding, and so on. But I think could have done it a little bit earlier, but we were waiting for just more and more, even though we already have a number of case studies and so on. So, I mean, these are some of the mistakes I think we have made personally. But yes, we keep learning from them. So I think it's very important in this whole journey to keep reflecting, keep talking to others in the startup journey who may be at a similar point or ahead of you, and continuously get feedback and ideas on how to proceed forward.
Interesting, Mansi. Shyam, one interesting mistake or interesting issue that most startups forget. How do you think startups can effectively manage their cash flows in the initial stages to avoid running out of funds prematurely? Even companies like Byju's are facing it tough. It can suck life out of the startup. What is your suggestion to them?
See, we are more early stage investors, Mr. Kurmanath. So our investments are pre-Series A through Series A up to Series B. So you're talking that 1 to 5 mil or so USD. But so in this part of the journey, it's really, really hard. I mean, most of the founders are raising their first couple of million when they come to us.
It's a kind
And
of eye of the storm.
yeah, it's early. I mean, this is really
Yeah.
where the hardest problem.
Yes.
Every stage of the journey is very hard, but naturally, the early stage of the company is amongst the hardest. There's no stage of the journey, honestly, which is easy. Everything is tough. But even this journey, even here in the early days, it's a tricky thing. I mean, because if you have the ability to, self-fund it or bootstrap it or raise from friends and family, that is for giving capital early, then, you have a little bit more breathing room to build something out before you start getting institutional investors in. The moment you start getting institutional money in, I mean, like funds, there are all kinds of pressures that start building. So even if you're raising 1 million, 2 million, you're talking about you'll end up diluting whatever it is, 10 or 15 or 20% stake in the companies, depending upon the stage of product development. You have to ensure that there are clear milestones you've defined for that money. And you're going after and hitting those milestones, and you've agreed with your investors that if you hit those milestones, then either they will, continue to back you, or at least you can hit the market to raise the next round once you get to the certain milestones. Provided the company is not in a position to make revenues count. I mean, if you have an ability to get your customers to pay for it, pay for your solution early, and you can use that to keep your journey going, nothing beats that if you can get the customer to pay. But many a time, many companies, you are not at that stage. You still need to raise that few million before you even have a product which you can put out in the market. So you still need to raise it. So how do you raise it? And how do you ensure that the cash flows, you have enough cash to even build the company? So this is where you need to be very clear about what you're going to achieve with your whatever you're raising in the first round. Have clear milestones, try and meet that, keep your cash burn under that, and ensure that you have enough time to raise the remaining amount so that you have enough cash before you run out of the first set of amount that you've raised. So you need real tight control when you're doing this, because we've seen many companies that run out or get very close to running out, and then they have to take capital at very onerous conditions, or valuations, which completely messes up the capital table, the cap table of the company. I mean, because you end up giving up too much of your company up or stake up front, because early investors can basically charge what they want to charge because you don't have money, you're running out. So, that's the reality. Many startups face this problem because inevitably the founder needs to be overly optimistic. That's just the nature of the game. You have to really believe in what you're doing. But in that projections, unless you are really practical of where you can get to, you will end up not being able to meet the milestones you've set out. So we ask our founders to be very realistic, and even if they've set out their projections, ask them to reconsider and see what happens if they attained only half of it. Can you still ensure that you don't run out of money, or how can you manage? So a lot of it is scenario planning. A lot of it is figuring out, what is realistic, what is the extra optimism that is being layered on beyond what is realistic. And then you have to manage within that. I mean, that's where the combination of what the founders are thinking and the investors on the table can agree. They all eventually need to agree to something very pragmatic, that this is what is realistic to do in this time frame. So if you hit that, you can raise the next round, and then the story keeps going. But if you're not able to meet that, then you end up running into these cash flow issues very early when you don't have customer revenues to support you. So this is something we've continuously seen. Or if you are in a very hot space, you ought to try and raise enough that you don't need to hit the market for 2 years or 2.5 years, where you have enough breathing room. If you are able to raise enough because say you're doing something, great in some form of AI or whatever, something that is very hot today. And then if you're able to raise the capital, enough capital early, and if you are prudent enough to not waste it by, hiring like crazy or anything. You're prudent enough to save it and only still do what is needed, then you can buy yourself the runway and ensure that you don't run out of cash. Sometimes, we've seen really smart founders who know when to raise and can really raise accordingly and, reserve that remaining capital until the product is ready. And they were just able to leverage the timing in the market to be able to raise the amount. I mean, it just depends. I mean, each to his own. It has to play out. Each person. I mean, each kind of founder, each kind of company is different. So we'll have to see what works for one or the other. But yeah, the best is customer revenue. If you can get customer revenues to keep the show going, nothing beats that.
Okay. Yeah, that is actually no diligent advice, Shyam. Mansi, see, after money, it is the team that can make or unmake a startup. Can
Right.
you share some insights into the importance of building a right team and avoiding some common pitfalls in team formation?
So I think in terms of hiring itself, this is something everyone talks about. So it may sound generic, but I've also learned this the hard way. You must hire for humility and drive to learn. Of course, there's a baseline level of competency which is needed and pre-existing skill which is needed, but it is really all about how fast can the person iterate in the direction which is needed. And I think, early on, we definitely did make one or two mistakes where we felt that, okay, we're missing this skill. This person can provide this skill fast. Let's just go for it. And I would say it actually set us back in the longer term, given that it wasn't a good values fit. So I think being patient and being okay with even taking a bit longer with hiring people, of course, there has to be a limit, time limit on by when you must have someone. But being able to have that patience and not compromising on those core values, I think is really important when hiring. Also, I personally, for during hiring, I want to see what the person can actually produce. So a lot of people say I've done X and Y and Z, but I prefer to always give some sort of assignment or some sort of brief thing which actually helps me see what kind of work they do and how they approach any open-ended problem statement. That I found to be very helpful in weaning out in the hiring phase. And I think post hiring, it's all about setting the right management practices. So, in my opinion, good management is all about three things. So, there's clarity in terms of what you expect from a given person and how they're actually faring on that. Second is support in terms of the organizational support that they need to succeed. And the third thing is accountability, holding them accountable to those expectations on a regular basis. And setting up systems to enable these three things, I think, is very key to getting the best out of people. So, for us at least, I think we've been fortunate that there's a great sort of values and cultural alignment in the team. And I wouldn't say it's always happened intentionally, but we've been fortunate that it has manifested. And now I think we're very careful about maintaining that. And we've seen recently, I think in the last 6 months, we've invested a lot in terms of setting up good people operation practices. So clearly spelling out expectations from everyone in writing, doing regular feedback sessions, discussing how we can support them, and training everyone across the organization to think in that way. And every 2 months, doing a sort of formal assessment, every 6 months, doing a performance evaluation, and so on. I think we've seen that we can really, really improve the output from any given person if we do these things right. So that's what I would say in terms of building the right team. I think keeping an eye out on what kind of long-term culture you want to build is also really important. Again, we've been fortunate. I think we've had some good teammates who've really pushed us to focus on culture, even when we were busy running around, focusing on investors, focusing on external things. But because of that, now I'll say we have a very cohesive internal culture which sort of differentiates us, creates a lot of team bonding and loyalty, which I think is very important to stick it out through difficult things in the long run. So I think
Yeah.
thinking through what you want the organization to look like and feel like for people that are working there is also really important for any founder.
Yeah, culture is a key factor to build a good team. Shyam, you related the kind of mistakes that the startups do early in their journey, and what actually they should do in terms of cash flow management. Can you tell us an anecdote where a startup made a mistake and that caused a damage, or how actually they corrected it and came back on the tracks?
Mr. Gumnath, I mean, without naming companies, what I can
Yeah,
do
without
is
names. Yeah,
ran
obvious.
a we ran a climate seed fund infused from the in 2012 onwards. So I can tell you some learnings from there. You can actually be very early to a market, and that can cause a lot of problems. So in our case, I think even as a fund, bunch of the sectors that we were trying to address back then, it was still pretty early for India. And in terms of a overall market, it's not that the problems don't exist. All the problems is there, but in terms of a actual enterprise market for many of these areas, India was just not there in that time, 2012, 13, 14, 15. Those are the times when we were investing in those startups. Many sectors were still very new. I mean, for example, one of our big investments was in a company which was in the geo-cooling space, geothermal based cooling. So it was not geothermal heating, but geo-cooling. Now, this is a sector which, if you look at the theory of HVAC, the air conditioning technology, you realize that it was never developed with tropical countries in mind. It was developed in the West, where the outside temperatures can even tend to drop significantly. So the way the air conditioning technology was designed was to reject the waste heat into the atmosphere outside. I mean, if you think of a country like India or any equatorial country, your outside temperatures are very high. So it goes 30s, 40s to even early 50s in centigrade. It's really hot. So the challenge for conventional air conditioning is very significant when you have to reject waste heat into the atmosphere. So a much better solution actually could have been geocooling, where you are able to leverage the temperatures 10 feet under the ground, where you have temperatures between 24 to 26 degrees, where you can reject the heat. I mean, it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about air conditioning. And we saw phenomenal potential in what these guys wanted to do and the tech work they had done. But this is a case in point where the opportunity is incredibly massive. The team had all the right chops. They had the experience of 10 to 20 years in different HVAC companies, came from the West. In terms of training, I mean, they were Indians, but from who had been working in these companies abroad for many years, understood the tech, understood how to build a business. But then you realize there is a bunch of stuff that still didn't work because this tech itself had not scaled. You could do it at a certain small level, but you could not scale it into large building. The technology in terms of this leveraging the underground heat levels had to be developed further. And it was way more complex than we anticipated. In spite of the company raising couple of rounds, 2, 3 rounds from pretty large investors, it still the technical challenges, the fact that regulations were not there in place in India, there was no recognition of what such a technology could do. Globally, also, it was still very new. So many things sometimes you realize, even though the team and the potential of the tech and everything is good, you may still be little too early in a space. And that can destroy a company entirely just because almost may not even be for much fault of theirs. I mean, it's just that they were too early. It is things need more time, certain things before it gets ready. I mean, it's just like even electric vehicles, is that in the other. I mean, there is a time for these things to happen. I mean, you have to have a cost down in batteries to a certain point. You have to have charging infra develop at a certain price point. Only then will certain things make sense. Just because, so 15 years back, in trying to launch EVs at the magnitude at which you're launching EVs in India today will not have worked because the other costs were simply too high. The battery costs were too high, charging infra costs were too high. Only now, once these costs have come down to a certain level through global deployment and technology development and everything, only now it begins to make sense. So one humongous learning for us is that some sectors are just too early. You need to time it, and it's never easy to time anything. But that's a risk that, especially early stage venture capital, we face. So for us, that was a case where there was nothing redeeming about the whole experience. It was very difficult for everybody involved. And that was not a case where a company could come out of that problem, because it was a very capex heavy industry to begin with. But the market was just not ready. Technology was not fully ready, and we suffered the consequences of it. But I mean, you learn. You live and learn with your experiences, and then you work with it.
Yeah, very sad. No, Orkut has failed, but Facebook, is become a huge success.
Yeah, and each company will have its own reasons, why Orkut failed versus why Facebook won. I mean, there are different things each company brings to the picture at a given point of time.
At
Different
different point, yes,
models,
yes,
different go-to-market
yeah.
strategies. Some strategies work and some strategies don't. And
Mm,
sometimes you're just too early. Exactly.
yeah,
Sometimes the market just
yes,
may not be ready.
yes, yes. Mansi, if you can give 2, 3 suggestions to startups, who have just started their journey.
Sure, just started the journey. I mean, I think at the beginning stage, the most important thing, of course, is very close customer feedback, being there with customers. Also, not necessarily always listening when a customer says what solution they want, but rather focusing on what problem they have and which problem is really top of mind, or at least in top 3 or top 5 problem statements for them. That I think is very critical. As Mr. Sham was saying earlier, having customers that are champions, that's really, really important. Especially if you're in the B2B space, it's all based on referrals and customer success later on. So if you don't have that early on, that will create a challenge in terms of scaling. And that's not something that you can brute force. I think for founders, at the early stage, of course, you have to be involved in doing everything. But as you start building a team, ideally, you should only do those things which are ambiguous in nature. If you can describe it, what has to be done, you can delegate it. And you should delegate it, because if the founder is not free in the market, meeting people, building relationships, or building the culture of the team, things won't grow beyond a point. So I think aggressive delegation and clarity to teammates on what is expected from them is really important for that. And yeah, I'll say that, at each stage of the startup journey, challenges are different. So when you're early on, the challenge is my product working? Is my product something which customers actually value? Then the challenge is getting right execution and having happy customers sufficiently to go to the next stage. And then later on, like where we are standing now, we've been through that early journey. Now it's about how do we really grow? We have to reevaluate our strategy in terms of what it'll take to get to the next level. How do we increase our price point? At the same time, now that we've been in the market for 1 or 2 years, there may be more risk of competition and so on, also affecting pricing. And so at every stage, I think taking that time to reevaluate every couple of months what it'll take to get to a next stage, and speaking to people who are actually at that next stage, I think that's very important to keep things going on the right track.
Thanks for the insights, Mansi. Thanks, Shyam. Very valuable insights. Thanks for your time and sharing your insights with our listeners. Thanks very much.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.